Hey gang, whether you're new to quilting or you've been doing it for a long time, there's something we can all learn from the log cabin block. Let me walk you through some of the steps. Let's get started. That is right, everybody. Happy 2021. I know I've already put out one video, but welcome to the new year. I am Rob Appell from Michael Miller Fabrics. Welcome to Making It Fun. I do all kinds of I think they're really cool sewing and quilting and craft videos right here. If it's your first time, welcome. We have a great block of the month that just started last week. And this week, what I want to do is just play a bit with education and take a traditional quilt block, the log cabin, one of the very first, teach you all a little bit of the history of the block, teach you the simple breakdowns of the block, and then we're going to just take this and expand it and have a ton of fun. So I'm just going to dive right into the supplies. You can see already on the table I've got tons of strips of fabric that I've already made. And like I said, let's start with the very beginning. Hey, let's start with the history itself. So this is what we consider a log cabin block, and I'll set it down nice and still so you can see it there. Let's start with the tradition of the log cabin. It is a block that represents the home, and the center of the home, the center of the heart where all the warmth comes from, is the fireplace. And thinking of this in the traditional sense, that is why we find most every log cabin block made with a red center, even if the colors change. Now, you can do whatever you want. This is quilting, of course, and you can make your colors any way you want. This is quilting, of course. But that is why those of you who are new to quilting see so many red square centers or red centers in the center of the log cabin block itself, because it originally represented the center of the home, the warmth of the heart of the family, the fireplace itself, where the cooking and all the gathering and everything was done around the home. So super cool. So that's step one, is you're going to start with basically a center piece, and it does or does not need to match the rest of the quilt. That's kind of fun as you look through and check out, go on social media, just type in log cabin quilts and you will see a million quilts. And what's really fun is to see all those quilts that are constructed with the log cabin blocks that you don't actually recognize it as a log cabin at first. I saw a really cool tulip quilt today that was done just that, but the blocks themselves were turned on point, and that is another term for you new quilters that basically means your blocks are not running horizontal vertical, but they're running kind of on point in a diamond shape. Doesn't change the construction, it just changes the layout in the end. So with that said, keeping it simple, keeping it basic, a couple of the things that I really like to do when I'm making my log cabin blocks is I like to have my colors start from the lighter and work their way out to the edges, going from light to dark. And one of the things I want to point out pretty dang quickly, and you can see I've got a couple of other blocks on the design wall here, is some of the quick changes that will happen if you get a few of your colors out of order. So let me point it out this way. Starting with our warm family, the yellows and oranges, I've gone from my lightest yellow out to kind of my medium orange, and then kind of a peach out to my darker red oranges on this side. So step two to the understanding of the log cabin block is keeping your color families on one side of the aisle or the other, and then also choosing fabrics that have different textures. Little prints work great. That's why the Michael Miller basics are so awesome for this, because we have so many different variety of textures and colors available. So what I was saying is color-wise, sorry, I get so distracted thinking about all these wonderful things. So keeping my color families organized, and then the fabric choices growing in color value. This is a really traditional, really simple way to set it up. And as a matter of fact, one of the tricks I've done, and I've got another video for all of you out there, is the use of, that's right, one of these crazy little tools, your cell phone. You can take photographs of your quilt squares and then use this really cool app from Instagram that's called Layouts. Thank you, Jennifer Carlton Bailey. I appreciate you teaching me this. I want to make sure I give credit where credit's due. With that Layouts app, you can turn this block into a whole quilt. So let me pretend like with a snap, it's on the design wall, right? And now you can see what this square would look like in a traditional layout where, one, they're all going the same direction, and two, isn't that easy? Now they're all building their diamonds of their log cabin. And you can see that difference there as well. So while we're talking color organization, I'll show you how to make these in just a second. I've got all these pieces. We're going to sew them together. But let's just talk about what happens if you get one or two of your strips kind of out of order. So in this case, I want to point out that you can see I've gotten my darker strips kind of in different than the farthest outside edges. And what that can do for you is add a new secondary element of design. So if I magically put this one on the design wall, there it is. Pretty cool, right? Check it out. You can actually see the way that that dark green, then the light green, the light purple, then the dark purple actually form the concept of sashing within the blocks. So in other words, oh, back to the camera here. In other words, it almost looks like you're using smaller squares with sashing. And that's the other cool thing about these log cabin blocks is you can build a variety of sizes and put them all back into the same quilt. But we were starting with the traditional, and the traditional, all of the squares finish at the same size, and they are almost always of the same fabrics in the same location in each and every block. So where you would see this wonderful hash dot print here, you would find that in each and every location in each block. And that's what gives you the opportunity to keep them organized all in a row or put them in diamonds like that. Make sense? Awesome. Okay, now with that said, like I said, I want to dive into the construction of these. Super simple. So what I did is I chose a bunch of my favorite basics, utilizing, like I said, some of these medium to larger scale prints like the marble. The hash dot is wonderful in there. Of course, for my center red, I chose the Fairy Frost Blood color because it just looks like fire to me. And then when you see all of those little textures coming back together, they really add a little bit of interest, but no one fabric distracts from the rest. Because remember, you're thinking in color gradients. Your color gradients do the work in the log cabin block. The prints are only part of the color value. I'm hoping that makes sense. So that being said, let's go ahead and start. Now my trick, if you're not already following a pattern that you've purchased from somebody or downloaded for free on the internet, let's say you're building your own pattern, my strips are 1.5 inch by the length of the goods when I'm getting started. Now I purposefully choose a 1/2 inch add-on measurement when I'm cutting my first strips. Like I said, these are 1.5s. Maybe I would also use 2.5s or 3.5s, but in the traditional block, all of the strips are going to be the same width, including our center strip. Now, the reason I add that 1/2 inch increment of math is it makes the calculations moving forward all the easier. We're going to come back to that point, I promise, but let me show you what I mean. So now I've already pre-cut a couple of my center squares. They're squares, so one side's 1.5 inches. You can do the rest of the math on that one. Now, let's just go ahead and build out again, maybe like one of these yellow-orange blocks, right? So in doing that, I'm going to come on in here and I'm just going to go ahead and find these are my working pieces. I'm going to find my lightest color. So you're going to make 2 cuts of the same size, but always of different fabrics, maybe. What I'm trying to say is, if that's a 1.5 inch square, your next cut to sew on will also be a 1.5 inch square. And so I'm going to do this, and now I just realized I'm going to have to be left-handed, which I am not, so I'm going to be very careful. And I'm going to cut that. And so right now we're just going to go ahead and match up those 2 1.5 inch squares right sides together. What you're going to want to use is a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I always like a edge guide. And what you're going to do is you're going to want to make sure that that 1/4 inch is fairly accurate to the 1/4 inch, because we're going to use mathematics to calculate in the long run. That's the tip that I've really learned that's really been helpful to me. The other point that I found makes things really easy is ironing each step as I go along. So you're probably going to have a lighter fabric towards a darker fabric. So we're just going to press into the dark edge there. So my first 2 pieces were 1.5 inch square. I told you I was using a 1/2 inch add-on with my cuts to facilitate making life easier. I'm going to build this block using the same fabrics now on 2 sides so that we end up with a larger scale block like this. I don't know if you picked up on it earlier, I used the same fabric in 2 locations in each row. On the smaller block I used a different fabric in each location. Well, sometimes I use the same because I had chosen 5 fabrics per family, and if you're going to do different fabrics in each row, you should use even numbers because you have 2 per side. Makes sense? But you can always mix and match like you can see that I've done here. At any rate, you can go either route. We're going to build out this version. This will make the most sense. This is the real basic starting block, and then you can get creative from here. So again, we've done the 1.5 and 1.5. So now we got to put in this piece. And so what's really going to be cool is we've pre-cut all of these strips to the 1.5 inch width by the length of the goods. So the 1.5 and the 1.5 sew together to make 3. However, when they sewed together, they lost a 1/2 inch because of the 2 quarters coming together and doing this as a seam allowance, which really means the next strip is going to be 2.5 by 1.5. We've already made the 1.5, so now all we have to do is cut a 2.5. And actually, that's the trick I really want to share with you in the building in the beginning, is if you use the 1/2 inch increment in cutting your strips, that is actually your seam allowance calculation. So now every cut we make, we're just going to add 1 inch. If I had made 2.5 inch wide strips, every cut I would make, I would add 2 inches. So going from a 2.5 to a 4.5 to a 6.5. But today we went from the 1.5s. And so now I got to flip my ruler upside down so I can read it correctly and make a 2.5 inch cut. Now, the reason I want to use my ruler for this is I want my strips to be accurate in the cutting process to make sure that I'm not tweaking or stretching or manipulating the block in the sewing process. So before we can sew this, this is the second block to the same project we're making, which means that we need to also, the third thing we've got to do on our log cabin blocks is we've got to make sure we make them all the same. So for a moment, I'm just going to take a deep breath. I'm going to bring this block right over, and I can see that my red fireplace is right here, and my first little piece of furniture was put, or my first log in my house was put right over here on my right-hand side. Next one goes on the top. Once I marry this one right in here, I don't have to worry about this anymore because I've already set the strategy of going around the fireplace with each add-on row. Oops, got a little sloppy, so I'm just going to take a moment. Flip this over so the seam's in my favor at this sewing, and we're going to put another 1/4 inch seam allowance in. I'm not joking around about ironing after each step, and at this point now I'm just going to start pressing out away from center so that each block kind of builds around as it goes. And actually that's kind of what the back is going to look like. So they're not really getting in each other's way, those seams aren't. Okay, so we've already used 2 cuts from our lightest of the yellow family. So the other thing we're doing is we're working in one family, 2 cuts, and then the next family, 2 cuts, back and forth so that we can work our way around the center. So now I'm going to go to the lightest fabric from the secondary family, and I'm going to go ahead and cut a strip from there. Now, I believe I told you a few moments ago, you're making 2 of every cut. So we had a 1.5 by 1.5, a 1.5 by 1.5. This is the 2.5 by 1.5. Yes, you guessed it. This will also be a 2.5 by 1.5. And the easy thing to know is it's going to go basically right on the opposite side of the first piece. So let's get that 2.5 cut so I can show you how to sew it on. Accuracy does really help here. And the next point I was starting to make is it's going to go opposite. This is row 3 or round 3, so it's going opposite of 1. So you're working on opposite sides of each other as well. So I'm just going to flip that over and come on in for my seam allowance again. Now this block is starting to grow, and if you've ever seen any of my other sewing videos, you know I'm a big stickler for having the weight of the fabric on the feed dogs of the machine. The feed dogs pull the fabric through. So the last row, it was equal weights, but at this point now, I want my heavier fabric down low. I want my new add-on piece riding on top. So I've stitched it on here, and again, back to the ironing board I go. Super, super simple. I'm going to press it out. And now I'm going to put on another piece. Now this piece should cut, you guessed it, that's right, 3 1/2 by 1 1/2. But I'm about to show you what I don't want you to do. This is the way I have sewn for a lot of years, and it works in some locations, but there's a disadvantage to doing it this way in this location. Let me show you what I mean. So right now, if I was doing it the old Rob, did I say slob? Oh, maybe I said Rob. Anyways, it doesn't look good. I take a chunk, a strip, and I start on one end. That makes sense, but watch this. Now, if I just go ahead and sew this on, due to the weight, there's a tendency that I could actually be stretching the new fabric. I come to the end, and what I used to do is I would come to the iron, again, potentially adding a manipulation that shouldn't be there. Pressing it, and then coming to my ironing board, and my cutting board, lining up the outside edge, and then trimming it to fit. It'll fit, but what can happen is the block edges can start to distort and waffle and get wild. You may have heard the term "that will quilt out." Let me know what you really think. If you get your blocks too tweaked, they're not going to quilt out. I promise, because I've been trying it for years. So what I want you to do is follow the mathematics and the calculations, and that starts by adding the 1/2 inch to your strip width, right? So the 1 1/2, that 1/2 inch was the math. So I was cutting my strips, everything was going smooth. So I had a 1 1/2 by 1 1/2, a 2 1/2 by 1 1/2. We're at 3 1/2 by 1 1/2. So when I come back to add on the next color, let me just come to my block and make sure I grab the right one out of my stack over here. It's going to be the second color value. And now I'm going to cut a 3 1/2. But because I like efficiency, and I know that cutting the math works, and I knew I did a 3 1/2, now I just did a second 3 1/2, which means I've used up the two pieces that are the same size. So I'm going to now cut a 4 1/2 while I'm here. And this is where the efficiency starts to come in. And if you calculate it from the beginning, you can really cut all your strips at once, just making sure that you're moving from pile A color to pile B color, pile A color to pile B color, so that you make sure you're cutting the right sizes for the right sides of your block. So as a reminder, I added 1 inch to this second cut so that I can go ahead, and as I bring this in, I'm bringing it in on top of the first piece. Now I'll fold it over, it matches up. And I'm going to come on back in here and do my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now the benefit of having that second cut done is that I'm just going to step to the iron. I'll be able to press it. And then as I get ready to drop in that same fabric, I just want to make sure I'm staying on the yellow side. If I have a yellow side and an orange side, I'm staying on the yellow side, not accidentally stitching this over here. So this is going to go here, lock it down, and continue on with that process all the way through. Now pressing out the first of the 4 1/2 by 1 1/2 strips. So then when I come into my secondary color pile, make sure I'm grabbing the right one. It was that wonderful fairy frost there. Okay, so again, now I'm going to have a 4 1/2. I always get so nervous cutting in front of all of you. What if I cut the wrong size? I'd have to cut another piece. And then a 5 1/2. That's that 1 inch add-on trick. And again, I really prefer to cut both sections of fabric necessary before I move away from that piece of fabric. It just helps me keep it all so much more organized in my mind there. Flip it on over and keep on moving. And by following these simple techniques, the patchwork really couldn't be much easier. And if you practice it this way, you'll actually improve your accuracy in both your cutting and your sewing and your pressing, and just keep building out as your squares go all the way around. Now, just in case you're interested, I used 5 different colors on each side. So my very last strip, and you'll have one last strip that you don't cut a second one for. On this particular block, I worked my way all the way up to a 1.5 by 11.5 inch strip. So this block should technically finish out at about 11.5 inches. But again, you can keep calculating or adding. You can add in all of your different colors any way you want for all kinds of different organization and different colors and different layouts, and have all kinds of fun. So before I leave you all here today, I want to just give you a couple of more moments of creativity utilizing that awesome app from the Instagram layouts. And I've taken these blocks that I've been creating, threw them on the design wall again, just took a photograph and played with them through Instagram. So I think I'll just roll a little bit of music for all of you and show you a few more of those layouts and a couple of different ones. Point out that you can have all your colors, like I said, running in one direction, forming diamonds, doing all kinds of different stuff. Zigzags and crazy different manipulations. They're super, super fun. So I want to say thank you all for being here today. I appreciate you following along. Make sure you're subscribed to the videos. We have a blast here at Making It Fun every week. I will be back next week. We're going to tackle the modern wonky version of the log cabin and just have a blast with it. I'll teach you a little bit about free sewing and free piecing, and just a little bit of way to free up if you don't want to be so accurate. And the cool thing is, if the blocks all finish out about the same size, we can put them together in the same quilt. So you never know what we're going to end up with at a project right here at Making It Fun. Like I said, let's roll that music and show you some more designs over on the design wall. Thanks again, folks. We'll see you with the wonky one next week.